Each of our speakers tonight brings a unique perspective on housing stability and successful aging, and we are fortunate to learn from their experience and research. In your goodie bag, you'll find a question card. If you think of a question during the panel, please write it down and include your phone number or an email. If time allows, we will answer some of your questions live, and if not, Center of Concern staff will follow up with you afterward. All right, and we're going to move on to some questions. Okay, we're going to begin with Katie. Katie, can you talk to us about what stable housing means to you and your organization? Okay.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Representative Musman. So I'm Katie Egan. I'm the Continuum of Care Planning Director for the Alliance to End Homelessness in suburban Cook County. And our mission is to end and prevent homelessness in suburban Cook County, just as the name says. So what that means to us is that every resident of Cook County has a safe and stable place to live. And that means that they have a place they can live that they can afford, and they have the services that they need to thrive. And so behind me on the screen here, we have a little bit of a snapshot. So in our role at the Alliance, we lead the Cook County Continuum of Care. So this is the strategic planning body for our homeless response system for the 130 suburbs of Chicago. In that role, we do an annual census to count the number of people experiencing homelessness on any given night at the end of January. So this is our 2025 snapshot, just to kind of ground us in where we're at when it comes to people experiencing homelessness. So as you can see up here, during the January 2025 census, 1,368 people were experiencing homelessness at the end of January, one night at the end of January. The majority of those individuals, 1,264, were staying in an emergency shelter designated for people experiencing a housing crisis. There was 104 individuals on that night found by volunteers sleeping overnight outside because they had no other place to stay. You'll also see on the screen that about 14% of those individuals on that one night were age 55 and older. And during that census overnight, we encountered 24 individuals who were 55 and older who were sleeping outside. So I set that stage here for those who are experiencing this most intensive housing crisis of truly having no other place to go, and a significant number of those individuals are 55 and older. So what we do know, and if you'll go to the next slide for me, please, is that everyone's housing crisis is unique, but the solution for everyone is the same: safe and stable housing. And so what we do as the leader of our homeless response system is lay out interventions that meet folks where they're at in their housing crisis. Again, not everyone's housing crisis is the same, so the intervention might look different. But the goal at the end of every intervention is to have that safe and stable place to live that someone can afford and has the services they need to thrive. And this gets at what Representative Musman was talking about with our coordinated entry point system as well, which does that assessment of where are folks at in their housing crisis and what's the right intervention for them. So at the front of that homeless response system is homelessness prevention. This is for folks who have experienced some kind of a temporary economic crisis, are at imminent risk of losing their housing because of that temporary economic crisis, but have a way to maintain housing going forward. So what does that mean? So let's say that my neighbor has lost their job, they've fallen behind on rent the last 3 months because of losing their job, but they have a new job that starts next month, and they're going to be able to pay their rent going forward. The homeless prevention intervention provides one-time rental assistance to pay that back rent, to pay those back utilities, to allow someone to stay in that housing they already have without losing that housing and having to experience homelessness in a shelter or unsheltered. So that, when you call entry point, which we have the resources up here, is a prime example of someone who would call that number, they'd be assessed for that specific housing crisis, and they'd be connected to one of 15 agencies located throughout suburban Cook County who can provide that homeless prevention assistance with that goal of one-time assistance to keep people housed where they are. The next part of that is folks who have lost that housing or have that night or the next night say, I need shelter. I don't know where I'm going to stay. I need a place to go. And that's where we have shelter diversion, which also by calling that entry point call center, someone would be assessed for this, connected to one of 9 nonprofit agencies across suburban Cook County to have a housing-focused problem-solving conversation. What can we do to get you to safe and stable housing? What would that look like? And last year, 48% of the time, we were able to find an alternative for folks, either staying with family or friends, through conflict mediation, they can stay where they're at. But 52% of the time, someone had nowhere else to go and needed emergency shelter. So that's what we have in the center of our homeless response system, that crisis intervention for folks who have nowhere else to go, to receive services, to work with trained staff to try to find safe and stable housing. And again, that's what we have as the solution to all of the interventions, which is safe and stable housing, which is how do we find housing that someone can afford regardless of their income with the services they need to maintain that housing. And so that's again where we get at our coordinated entry point system when we think about those safe and stable housing interventions that are funded by Cook County, the state of Illinois, HUD. It's that rental assistance and those services, and we prioritize those housing interventions based on how long someone has been experiencing homelessness.
Thank you, Katie. Chief Haley, can you talk to us about what stable housing means to your organization?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's good to be with you this evening. I shared with some folks that I was born here in Des Plaines up the road at Holy Family Hospital, and then lived in Arlington Heights until I was a first grader. And so it's good to be back in the place where I was born. But as we talk about housing and housing stability, I think about it, let's think about it from a lens of a first grader and what home means to that child. So home is a place where, I have a first grader at home, so, his process, he wakes up, he gets ready for school and has appropriate clothing to wear for that day, appropriate shoes that he can wear for that day, and is off to school where there is a welcoming environment. He's been there the year before, he knows his teachers, and the plan is he will be there for the rest of that year. After that, he is able to come home, get access food, get the food that he knows that he likes to eat that we purchased for him. He can sit down and have a quiet place to do homework. And after homework, he can watch a little TV or play with his magnet tiles and his cars and his games until it's time for dinner. At dinner, we have a chance to eat together as a family. I can medically tailor the meals that we have. My husband's allergic to tree nuts, so I know there's no tree nuts in our meal, but we have control over that in our home. Then if it's time for bed, he's able to take a shower, have access to clean towels, access to his favorite towel that he uses, and then we head to bed where he has a safe place to rest his head, and he has his stuffed animals with him that he can choose out also which books he wants to read before he goes to bed. And for too many of our children who are experiencing homelessness, that stability of the house, the protectiveness of our home is not available to many children in our communities across the state. One, with children experiencing homelessness, may jump from, may have interruptions in the school year as the family moves around. We have the ability to have our family have meals that we can choose and that are medically tailored. Actually, his grandparents are in town right now, so they're able to visit and stay with him and grow that relationship with him in their home. So there's so much in our daily lives that our homes provide for us that we may take for granted. And so our role within the Illinois Office to Prevent and End Homelessness is to ensure that across the lifespan, every Illinoisan has a safe place to be and a safe place to rest their head. In September of 2021, Governor Pritzker signed an executive order to fight homelessness, which included the creation of more infrastructure within state government to address homelessness. So it created our Interagency Task Force on Homelessness, which is made up of 16 state agencies and 4 members of the Illinois General Assembly. It's made up, and our role is understanding how can we invest and streamline dollars that are coming from the state and federal government to be able to support our unhoused folks here in our state. It also created the Community Advisory Council on Homelessness, which provides guidance to the task force on what the community needs in order to end homelessness. And then it created the position that I was appointed to, the Chief Homelessness Officer for the state. And we created an office where we really work with our state partners and with the community to address our state plan to prevent and end homelessness called Home Illinois. So Home Illinois is both our plan, which is renewed every 2 years. So we are now halfway through our second plan, and we'll start planning for our next. And we also then invest in what's called the Home Illinois program. So the state of Illinois, before Governor Pritzker signed the executive order, invested about $211 million in homelessness, and we are now over 150% of an increase in general revenue funding to support our unhoused neighbors. So this is on the screen behind us. You'll see the framework of our plan. We have racial equity at the core. So here in Illinois, Black Illinoisans are about 14% of people of Illinois' population, yet over 61% of those experiencing homelessness, if we are not including those who were migrants from the southern border, so about 60%. And in that, part of our role is really looking towards what are the root causes of homelessness, not the individualized barriers, and how are we going to close that disparity between rates of white homelessness and rates of Black homelessness. So here in Illinois, we have the second highest disparity in the country for states that have over 1 million Black residents of rates of white homelessness and rates of Black homelessness. So the first pillar is around building more affordable and permanent supportive housing. So we are in good company tonight and talking about housing. The second is around bolstering the safety net. So that's what Katie mentioned around prevention strategies, and then on to shelter. The third pillar is around increasing financial stability. So we're working on trying to understand workforce development supports for people who are living outside or living in shelter, how we advance our access to benefits for people who are eligible for benefits. And then the fourth is around closing the mortality gap. So here in Illinois, the average age of a person experiencing homelessness in our state is 56 years old. So we have significant work to do to understand how we can lower that disparity so that more people experiencing homelessness do live long enough to be older adults.
Thank you. Diane?
It's working. Okay, we weren't sure if the microphones on this end were working. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you, Rep. Nussman, for being here and doing this, and thank you, Senator Concern, because this issue is one of the most important that we are facing for older adults. I will tell you that our call line at Age Options serves all of suburban Cook County. The highest number of calls that we get every month is for people in need of housing or worried that they're going to lose their housing or just have some issue regarding rising rent or other issues. The classical definition that we use for what housing means to us is that there are 4 principles. Affordable, offering independence, in other words, not putting people into nursing homes or restricted living situations before they really need them, meeting their physical needs, meaning that they are accessible. Accessibility is just a really important issue, so often not considered. And then be free of discrimination, in other words, fair housing. But for us, we are trying to catch people a little bit ahead of what Katie and Christine were talking about. We really try to address the issue of homelessness way before, so get supports into place. When we hear about people on the day they're being evicted or the next week they're being evicted, it is really too late. So the whole array of different services in terms of financial equity, looking at all the benefits that might be available to somebody to try to find the best possible housing situation, all of those are the important factors to us. So I think you've answered so much that question already. I'll be a little shorter on this one.
Dina. Okay. Oh my, it is working. Okay. We're both surprised there's nothing on the mic saying it's on. So I apologize. Stability for ElderWorks, because we work with individuals who are unhomed, and we work with individuals that have funds and have homes. Stability looks different. A 93-year-old grandmother living with the granddaughter, or multi-generation, all in one home, that stability looks different. Chief Haley said, as a first grader, these things are important. Anyone's stability looks a little different because it's personal. It's what's there, right? But a roof over their head, food in their belly, funding a job, those are the core factors. And I'm sitting on an amazing panel that really has covered most of the answers to this. But when you look at do they have enough to make their rent or to make their mortgage? Diane covered this. It's people sometimes don't reach out until it's too late. There are some resources out there, and I think that's what all of us are trying to do, and Center of Concern has put us together for that information.
So we think this segues pretty nicely into our next question. And I'd say, it seems obvious to all of us what the right kind of housing looks like or why it's so important to have that. And it sounds like we all have a plan, and yet so often we can't actually get people there. It's very difficult to find people housing and get them to stay long term. So let's talk about some of the top barriers preventing people from actually accessing affordable and stable housing. And Dina, we're gonna let you go first.
All right. So first off, there's not enough housing out there. The state is moving forward for that. Even if there is housing out there, we're seeing more and more people that have unique requirements. They might need an elevator. As our older population ages, going up 5 flights of stairs is not sustainable. So that is there. Location, because we have individuals that are still working. Whether we're talking about somebody, I think we said the average age was 56 a little bit ago. We have an 83-year-old that is coming and looking for a job because they need more income. So having that location, access to the things they need, being able to walk or access transportation, the stigma, and a lot of individuals are in our in our world are solo agers that just don't know how to access that. And on top of that, if we're looking at individuals that are older, they don't have the computer skills or access to being able to get on to some of those wait lists. That's a real quick list for me.
Thank you. Katie, let's move on to you.
Okay, so some of the barriers that we see, so of course, and we're going to talk about it a lot tonight too, but there's just not enough abundant housing options for people at all income levels. And when we look at the housing interventions that I was talking about earlier, our primary interventions that we have for people experiencing homelessness, the stable housing interventions that I mentioned that are rental assistance and services, and most often those are funded through government funds, either through the county or the state of Illinois, and primarily in suburban Cook County through federal HUD dollars. Those interventions also rely on the private market. So those are subsidies that go to pay someone's rent, and someone would find a unit just like you or I would find a rental unit on the private marketplace. And that means partnering with private landlords. And we know that there is a high demand for housing at large. So when we're engaging landlords, when there's a housing navigator who's working with someone who's in shelter, who's been matched with one of those housing interventions, and they're trying to find a unit, there are barriers that stand in the way, even when we do have dollars to pay that rent. And those barriers might look like someone previously was incarcerated or had some kind of interaction with the justice system. Someone might have poor credit, someone might have a previous eviction. All of these things that have stood in the way of housing in the past and continue to stand in the way of housing are barriers that stand in the way even when we do have resources to help pay someone's rent and get them those services. We've done a lot of advocacy around this to try to remove those barriers, things like source of income protections that prevent a landlord from discriminating based on legitimate sources of income, whether that be VA benefits or a housing voucher or other sources of legitimate benefit income that can help pay for rent. And other things in Cook County, specifically around the Just Housing Amendment that helps to provide more protections for folks who were previously part of the justice system. But even with these increased attempts to try to remove barriers, we still struggle to find private landlords who are willing to partner. At the root of it, it goes back to just an overall lack of housing, abundant housing options that folks can afford. Up on the stage here too, we have research from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition Out of Reach report, which shows the housing wage. And this just further emphasizes the point that housing is out of reach for so many people, especially because another one of those barriers that private landlords are able to put in place because there is so much demand is having to demonstrate that your monthly income is 3 times the monthly rent amount, which is out of reach for, in Cook County, I don't think this is up on the stage, but close to 85% of people are paying more than 30% of their monthly income on rent. So again, it gets at this point of we just don't have enough abundant housing options for people who are staying outside as well as for people who are making less than minimum wage.
Yeah, thank you. Chief Haley, what are we seeing from the state level? What kind of barriers are we looking at, writ large?
So I want to echo what everyone has said, that ultimately that the reason why we have our community members living outside or in shelters or multiple families in a home is because we don't have enough housing, and we don't have enough housing because we aren't demanding it. there isn't enough of a political and social backlash to say that housing is important enough for all of us. And so I'm going to give one last first grader analogy. So if a grandparent is raising their grandchild and they take them to school because they are going to register them for school, that school can't say, I'm sorry, there's not enough room for you in this school system this year. You're just going to have to go on a waiting list or come back next year. We would never say that to that first grader, but we would say that about them having a house and having a home. I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait on a wait list. I'm sorry that you're going to have to wait and see if there's more space next year. We don't do that in education because we understand that education is a right and that school systems need to figure out how to expand to be able to allow all children who enroll in that school system to go to school. Think about what it would mean if we did the same for housing opportunities. We know from our own data that there's thousands of Illinoisans that get turned away from shelter every year because there's not enough space. There's no vacancy, there's no motel vouchers, and people wait and wait and wait. So I think that although we are incredibly proud of the investments that we have made in homelessness, we understand that we are far from a place where all people have a home. And a lot of that is driven by how expensive it is to build housing, right? That there's the Illinois Housing Development Authority estimates that it costs $440,000 to build a unit of housing within a multifamily building. And with the impact of the tariffs that are coming into place, our understanding is that cost per unit will probably increase. We don't know what that is yet. But understanding the current political realities of the tariffs will increase. And I think that part of our work in understanding affordability and housing is for us to truly understand what is at the root cause of homelessness. And homelessness is primarily driven by our housing markets and housing costs. So rates of homelessness in New York and in California are significantly higher, almost 4.5 times higher than here in Illinois. And it's not that we have figured out homelessness, right? If you think that the reason why someone is homeless is because they're down on their luck, or because they're using substances, or because they may have made bad choices in their life, and that's what causes their homelessness. Our rates of mental illness, substance use treatment, and others are not far superior than in New York and California. It's that our housing markets are not as out of control in the Midwest as they are on the coasts. So I think it's important as we talk about what are the barriers, it's really understanding our barriers of those of us who are housed and understanding what is at the root cause of this. And how are we able to demand more and demand that there's enough housing for all those that need it?
Thank you. I think that was very well said. I especially like your analogy about how a school can't turn people away, but regularly our communities do turn people away. I mean, at the end of the day, if we're going to talk about affordable housing, it has to go somewhere. And if every community continues to say, well, that's an important thing to have, I mean, not here, but somewhere nearby would be very good, one of our neighboring communities should take that on. But I'm concerned that maybe it's not a good fit for our community, maybe it's going to have too much congestion or too many kids in our schools. We need to find someplace else. And I think that is a barrier that we do run into regularly, and we like to think of people experiencing homelessness as other people, but not me, not my neighbor, not my family member, not my loved one. But in reality, those are the people that are most at risk for homelessness. And they live here in our communities, and they want to continue to stay here in our communities, but we've not made that accessible. We have said, well, we just don't have room for you. We'll try and think of something. And I kind of talked over you, Diane, but do you have anything that you would like to add to this conversation?
I'm just going to shine the light a little bit brighter on older adults again. at the beginning of the time when we were receiving American Recovery Act money, Age Options was able to create a home preservation program. And Suburban Alliance for Homelessness, our 2 legal assistance providers in suburban Cook County, and 9 of our local agencies partnered together to really try to ramp up. And we also partnered with the Cook County Sheriff's Office. And our partnership with the Cook County Sheriff's Office was great because they tried to give us a heads up before people were at the point of eviction. That team of people that works together reported that 56% of older adults seeking housing assistance did so due to their income. 56% said it was because of their income. In addition, 18% of them, at the time that they came to us, were very close to eviction. Just the rising number of older adults themselves, and this is our grandparents, it could be any older adult, to your point. But the main issues that older adults are seeing are the same as what we've said earlier, but in addition, I think senior-specific housing located in places that are walkable communities where seniors have support for their basic needs, where they're close to shopping, where they don't have to get on 3 buses to get to a grocery store and that kind of thing. Another big barrier with older people is complexity of navigation, which I think you've already mentioned, like how long do you have to stay on the internet to find something that's going to work for you. And another big one for older adults is deferred maintenance. And that even goes to the importance of chore housekeeping programs, home repair programs, and just trying to make sure that you don't have too many leaks in your roof is basically what it gets to.
So we've talked about the kind of barriers that people are experiencing, but maybe we could move to a more positive note and talk about success stories. Can you discuss maybe what approaches you've encountered that actually are helping people find or maintain their stable housing? And we'll start with you, Chief Haley.
So I think that the 2 models that we are really looked to right now is as models on both the crisis center side and then the housing side. So on the crisis response side, we really look at medical respite, which is in the homeless system defined as a type of shelter that has more clinical-based services embedded for people experiencing homelessness who have had an in-person hospitalization, inpatient hospitalization, and then come, too sick to be able to go to a traditional shelter, yet not sick enough to remain in the hospital. So any of us who've been in the hospital before, when you get discharged, there's still quite a lot of healing that happens when you get home. And I think that we've created that option, one, because it helps divert people who would otherwise might go to nursing homes, right? I think that we want to, because folks need to heal, you need to be in a place where you have, access to wound care, access to that supportive running water and other pieces that being outside would not work for you to have a full recovery. And being in a traditional shelter might not have the staff support to be able to help you. So we've invested in a medical respite capacity building initiative that's supporting communities across the state in developing medical respite beds. And we are working with our state Medicaid agency to see through a waiver from the federal government to be able to start to build services for that medical respite. So would create a stable funding source. The second model is around housing, and as Katie mentioned earlier, that permanent supportive housing, and I mentioned with our framework, is really our gold standard in supporting people who are experiencing chronic homelessness. So those who have a disability and who have had longer histories of homelessness. And in that, permanent supportive housing, it doesn't have a time limit. Services are voluntary. Just as, when your doctor tells you that you need to do X, Y, or Z, you have a choice in whether or not how you are going to follow that guidance. That's the same piece with services, right? That they are offered, and that there's a choice for participants in when they feel ready to accept those services. So they're voluntary, and there's no time limit. And unfortunately, permanent supportive housing is under attack right now from the federal government. Just on Friday, there was a new grant that was released from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development that we are concerned about the expectations of that grant and differing from traditional permanent supportive housing models. It no longer allows for people that have disabilities other than physical disabilities to be served in the housing that's built through this grant. So there are concerns there. In President Trump's skinny budget, so his proposal for this next fiscal year's budget, he had proposed to consolidate a number of programs within the homelessness space, 3 large programs within the homelessness space, and then limit them to 2 years, which would have destroyed the permanent supportive housing infrastructure. So luckily, the House and the Senate did not move forward with those proposals. However, just on July 4th, in July, the President signed an executive order on ending crime and disorder in America's streets that was really targeted at people experiencing homelessness, including advancing false narratives around substance use and mental illness, and around really pushing for criminalization and involuntary commitments for those who are experiencing homelessness. So I think this is a time when we are incredibly vigilant in understanding, how it is that we are able to support our unhoused neighbors when we see these attacks at this level.
Thank you. Diane, let's move on to you. What kind of things do you see working?
Well, it's not an innovative or brand new solution, but one thing I would say to start with is many older adults are not receiving all the benefits that they are eligible for. I've been saying this for a long, long time, but there is a program online called Benefits Eligibility Checkup. It connects you with your local agency, and it will take you through all the whole range of benefits that are possible. And anything you can do to reduce your expenses or increase your income, even a small amount. I've had older people say, well, it's not worth it for $15 a month, or if you just get a small benefit. But every single piece of funding that you can put together can make a big difference when you look at every system together. Only the percentage of people that receive SSI, supplemental security income, for example, is way below the number of people that should be receiving it. And so our local agencies, including Center of Concern, can help you apply for a lot of those benefits. And because income is one of the greatest barriers for older adults, I would really promote that idea. Other ideas that have been working are, there's been more people that are looking back into shared housing units instead of trying to find your own small housing unit. Often there can be a great relationship between an older person that has more housing than they need, and then somebody else that can share that housing. And often, one person can do the shopping, and the other person can offer them space in the house, plus offering companionship and reducing the social isolation issue. Co-housing is another thing that hasn't really come very well to Illinois yet, but there are a few incidences of co-housing developing where groups of older people gather together and reclaim an older building. Sometimes there are unused church buildings or buildings that nuns had occupied that might be adaptable for co-housing. And then the last thing is granny flats have been accepted by more communities. Not every community is allowing for those, but particularly in the West Coast, there's been more and more permission of granny flats being built. So those would be what I would offer.
That's wonderful, thank you. Dina?
Again, I'm more older adult focused, but we have seen in Illinois more affordable housing coming in. And it's not specific to seniors. We're seeing more workforce housing that does have a percentage of olders over 65 in these new programs. And we're seeing more and more intergenerational shared housing, or excuse me, affordable housing. And why is that important? As our older adults age, they tend to isolate. And isolation is one of those causes that really can be detrimental to their health. These intergenerational homes are awesome because they are set up with almost built-in families, and we have seen great success with that. Home modification programs, so people can stay in their own home. One of our booths here tonight is Northwest Partnership, and I just need to look at my list so I don't mess it up. But the programs that they have allow seniors and anyone to be able to do different programs. And there are programs out there. The negative is sometimes it's hard to find them. That's why you have Age Guide. That's why you have Center of Concern, ElderWorks. We help people navigate so they can find those resources. The other positive, I think, when we're looking at this, is how you're choosing to age, or who's helping you in that mission, and being able to plan a little bit more instead of reacting in a crisis. So I think those are a couple of things. The other things in people's homes, we're seeing technology that are helping people stay in their homes. Smart lights,